Hi, welcome to Starwell Astrology. My name is Sherry. Thank you for joining me today. I'm an astrologer and author, and I specialize in shadow work. And today I'd like to talk about Mars. Mars works in an interesting way in the birth chart because it's the god of war. It is how we take action. It's quick, arrogant, aggressive leadership type of energy. It is competitive and it is driven to take action. It's impatient and it's impulsive. Mars energy is how we take action in our reality. And although Mars represents pure actions, it does come from an emotional investment that we take action. But Mars is not an emotional sign. Mars will be driven to impulsively move into a position where it's defending itself without understanding the emotions that is driving it to take the action that it's taking. And although shadow work speaks to our emotional connections to our actions, Mars is not always conscious of the reason for its actions. And when you do shadow work, you start to understand your Mars and what motivates it, what allows it to respond or react actually to life based on that deep emotional connection that it's tied to. So when we look at Mars in the chart, it will show us how and in what way we're going to respond. And this, of course, like I said, is tied to an emotional connection, conscious or not. Our emotional connection is Venus, which will be another video that I would have to speak on that separately. But our emotional connection is to our Venus, but the moon is the filter for what we feel before we take action. So I spoke in the previous video about the moon. What does the moon have to do with shadow work? And I was explaining that a lot of our unconscious and subconscious behavior is described in our moon energy because it's linked to past lives, our ancestry line, and how we behave in this world comes from some kind of karma or energy that's tied to something from our past, whether it's your current childhood life, which is usually a reflection of your own personal karmic baggage, whether it's personal or collective or ancestral or generational. It doesn't matter. It's energy that we're carrying forward. And because of this, we act based on those programmed ideas that we recreate in this reality. And we recreate that by taking action through our Mars. So Mars is a masculine planet, and it is very direct. And also it is the impetus to act. It is the trailblazer planet. It is a hot and dry planet. The element is fire, and it's cardinal. And the cardinal energy is a doorway. It's a portal into something new or a new beginning. And so with this cardinal energy, Aries can be, or Mars can be used to open doors to a new portal, such as when we're born. Now, it's hard to talk about Mars without talking about Aries. And although I gave the title Mars in Astrology, we do have to talk about Aries because Aries is the first zodiac sign in an astrological wheel of karma. And Aries is ruled by the planet Mars. But because we're talking about Mars and where it's placed in our chart and how it is aspected or forms aspects to other planets in the chart. And this will describe a lot of how we take action. We also still have to talk about Aries and the first house, because they're all tied together in the astrological chart. So let me just quickly go back and describe Mars, because as I said, it's a breakthrough energy. It shows us our entry point into the world as a soul, and how we enter into this material reality will be through our Mars. But now going back to speaking about Aries and the first house, in the zodiacal wheel, the first house is represented by Aries. It's the Aries house, and Mars is the ruler of that house. But when we come into this reality as a soul, we first have to come from that 12th house, which is the void, the place that where we come from before we're born. It's the womb of the whole chart. It is also where we're linked to our unconscious, subconscious memories, our past life memories, our ancestry line. It's the spirit world. It's all the dimensions or realities or realms, all tied up in that one area in the chart. The 12th house is what we're born from after we've completed a cycle of life, and we've fulfilled most of the things we needed to do in the life we had before. We enter from our 12th house, which I won't say what it's ruled by, that might be confusing, but we enter from the 12th house into the first house. And that first house, like I said, is ruled by Aries, and it's how we identify with the reality we're in. And Mars is the ruler of that first house. So Mars is the I am presence. When you come into this reality at birth, you're born as a spiritual ego. You're pure until you choose that family that you're born into, and you start to reflect or re-experience wounding sometimes, or just past life memories. You bring them back into this reality to re-experience them through the family you were born into, the community, the race, the sex, the gender that you were born under. All that is a part of what you have agreed to come back and re-experience in this reality. And you do that first through the impulse at birth from Mars, to just be born into the reality. Now, once you're born, you then take on the shape of a personality based on the conditionings of the environment that you're in. But based on the perspective of astrology, this is something that you have decided to do before you were born. So although we may forget once we're born that this is something we chose, a lot of what we come into in this reality comes from the fact that we need to learn or relearn or re-experience something from a past life and bring it forward for healing. A lot of times, unfortunately, we don't do that work to heal. We end up re-experiencing it and re-causing even more wounding. So it deepens that karmic wound. And each time we're born, we'll keep recreating it until eventually we wake up and decide it's time to do the work. So, and this is just something that you have to be ready to do at some point. So Mars is our first impulse at birth. And when the soul takes birth, it becomes identified with a material reality, and it loses its innocence and becomes a conditioned personality. And the shape it takes depends on the rising sign of the zodiacal wheel at birth. Now, this may get a little bit technical here, but I'll do my best to explain. Is that, as I said, the 12th house is the womb, and the first house is your identity in this reality, how you see your reality and how others see you. But although the first house is an Aries house, there are signs that are changing every 2 hours as it crosses the horizon. So approximately every 2 hours, the signs will change from Libra to Virgo to Scorpio to, so it's like a wheel that keeps moving. So at the time that you're born, a specific sign will be on the horizon. And of course, this is something you decided before you took birth, whether you're conscious of it or not. And that sign is your rising or ascendant sign. I'll use those interchangeably throughout this video because they mean the same thing. Now, for example, in this diagram, you're born in the sign of Libra. Now, you are going to experience this reality through the identity or the archetype of Libra energy. And although you experience reality from the archetype of Libra, you're still going to come through that first house, which is an Aries house ruled, and it's the first house, which is your identity, ruled by Mars. That's as much as I need to say about that ascendant sign, but I just wanted to be clear so we don't all think that we're born under the Aries ascendant or rising sign. That is always changing. But the energy of Aries, the first house, and Mars is the first house that we experience reality through, regardless of what sign it falls on. So from an esoteric perspective, from the Dictionary of All Scriptures and Myths by Gaskell, it says in there that Aries is the period of the cycle of life. The ram or lamb is slain, signifying a divine sacrifice of the outgoing of spirit into manifestation. The higher self is limited to conditioned manifestations. Now, this is explaining how Mars is that period in life where we're born into this new energy. And the reason it's using the term lamb and ram is slain is because the lamb and the ram rules is the symbolic glyph of Aries. And I'll show you, this is what it looks like. It looks like a ram's horn. And it's showing that in the Bible, you'll see many examples of slaying the lamb. And it's talking about the spirit being slain by us being manifested into reality. And we forget about that higher self as we become conditioned to live in this reality through a physical body. So Mars is the planet that rules Aries as it becomes identified with its desire nature. And man feeds this carnal senses through this impulse while here on earth, hence the fall of man, which is the adversary of the spiritual ego, the self, or the I am presence. So Mars, because it's so innocent and so curious and so courageous and impulsive, it will act automatically based on its desire nature, ruled by the five senses. It wants to feed all of its senses, the impulse to touch, taste, hear, see, and feel. And without connecting them to an emotion, it will take action. And this is considered the fall of man. In other words, Mars and Adam are the same energy. And because of this, Adam is the first man who also represents the fall of man from his spiritual divine alignment into this material reality of feeding his sense desires by eating the fruit in the garden. We'll talk about Eve, which is also Venus, who is the temptress, in another video. So the soul or spiritual ego takes the body and gets groomed into one's family, culture, social setting, and the innocent newborn infant grows into an ego identity or self-image called a personality. We have little free will as an ascendant. And this is argued because we will never be able to fully determine what percentage and how much free will we have. But from an astrological perspective, we look at the ascendant as not having much, actually zero free will, let's put it that way. And it represents 50% of our chart. So this is why the conversation of things being fated and destined comes into play in our birth chart. In other words, we're born to experience certain things. And where our power lies that we miss is that we have power in how we choose to experience that event. But if those events that are fated or destined, they're predetermined to happen anyway. But as I said, the power we have is in how we choose to use our free will to align in divine will and therefore make the highest choice in each moment. So because the unconscious and subconscious memories and also our ancestry line and our past lives and anything that we want to associate with the void, the void in which we are born from the 12th house, when we bring that with us into our reality, into the first house, those are things that we can't change. We came with it, including the fact that we decide that we're going to be in a certain body and belong to a certain family and be a certain gender and a certain race. These are things you can't change. And that's why it is said that you have no free will at your ascendant and your rising sign. They are predetermined. And you're also going to get experiences that allow you to express the archetype of the sign that's on your ascendant, and others will also see you the way that the archetype of the sign on the ascendant will shape you. Now, the free will that we have, the ascendant sign does not have any free will, but the free will that we have does come from the moon to a lesser degree and the sun, which is 100% free will. In a previous video, I explained how the moon represents 25% of our personal will, but this will is limited. It's not as free as we would like it to, because the moon is linked to our past lives, our ancestry line, our blood, our DNA, which is all passed down. And because of this, we don't have as much free will through the moon as we would like. However, it does give us a chance to heal by getting in touch with our unconscious and subconscious memories and going inwards deep enough to heal this part of ourselves. And by healing this part of ourselves, we give ourselves a chance to align in our divine will, which is the sun. And that's 25% free will. That gives us the chance to express ourselves in this reality from a position of authority and inspiration. And it allows us to live our highest mission and purpose in this reality. And if we understand how to use our moon to align with our sun, then this is how we become liberated. Now, it's interesting that the Mars, when you connect it to the sun and the moon, it has a huge impact on both. From the perspective of the moon, Mars is debilitated in the sign of Cancer. Therefore, like I said, Mars is not really a very emotional sign. It's just it's innocent and pure, but does not have any connection to what it's feeling. It's acts through its five senses, and it makes it very difficult to turn inwards and understand what that impulse to act is coming from. So it becomes a very reactive energy. And because the reason it's debilitated with the moon is because the moon is how we filter our emotions. But the Mars and the moon, they're not in resonance with each other. So this makes it more difficult for us, especially masculine energy, because Mars is ruled by the masculine energy, to get in touch with what it's feeling. And although the moon is not really what you feel, it's how you filter what you feel. Those filters are very distorted because if we're not in touch with our emotions, then whatever energy we bring through our moon is going to be a distorted view or perspective of the reality that we're living in. But now the Mars with the Sun in the opposite sense is exalted, and I will circle back to that because I want to talk a lot more about how the Sun and Mars works very well together. But first, I want to explain how the Mars is fueled by the desire to be first. I want to talk about how it feels energized when it comes to a competition. If there's a war, send someone with Aries energies out, strong Aries energy out, and they will do the work to fight, win the battle, to defend its place, its traditions, its beliefs. It is very motivated for achievements and independence, and it's courageous. It's the leader and it's the trailblazer. And its sense of self is derived through that first house. So where the soul enters into the body and realizes itself to be a unique individual is that first house, that Aries house. And it becomes a conditioned self-image based on, like I said, the family it's born into, the traditions and the country and so forth. So, but Mars, as much as we might say it's very competitive or courageous, it does this from a place of innocence because it's newborn energy. It's fascinated with reality. When you're born as a child, as a baby, you see all the baby's very curious. It doesn't know what's safe and what's not safe necessarily. And so it will just act on curiosity. And because of that, the Mars energy kind of learns through its experiences, how it's experiencing its physical body, what hurts, what doesn't hurt, what feels safe, what doesn't feel safe. And it will do it by acting on it without even understanding the consequences of what that could mean. So Mars is our impulse for life, and it's just a very curious and open energy that is ready to explore the reality that it's born into right at birth. Now, from the perspective of astro-theology, Mars, as I said, is a masculine planet, and it's also under the element of the fire sign of Aries. And the Sun is exalted in Aries. In the previous video, I spoke about the Sun and its free will, but it's also masculine energy. And the Sun, it's also a fire planet. So they work very well together. The Sun is exalted in the Aries sign, unlike it being debilitated in the Moon sign. It feels very aligned with that Sun energy, because Sun also is a very leadership, passionate energy that Mars likes. Now, based on this chart that I want to show you, the sun, which is the sun, is also from an esoteric, an astro-theology perspective. The sun and the son, based on this chart, is showing how the sun moves on the ecliptic line. The ecliptic line is also the circuit of Galilee that Jesus walked on. It's showing how the sun moves through each sign month by month. And it also can show, this is a zodiacal wheel, by the way, but just shown in the sine wave. And the sine wave is the sin of Eve, but we can talk about that another time. But the sun and the son also shows that right ascension meridian is the 0 degrees of Aries, which is when the sun moves from Pisces under the horizon into the light of the first house. So it moves over the horizon. And that usually is at 6 a.m. Based on a clock, this also works where 6 a.m. is at 0 degrees Aries, and that midday would be the midheaven. And and it also mimics the same thing with the seasons, the equinox and the solstice. At 0 degrees of Aries is the spring equinox. And right ascension meridian is that 0 degrees of Aries. And the initials are the same as the ram, which rules Aries, as I mentioned previously. Now, there's a whole lot linked to this: ram, lamb, right ascension meridian, Aries, the sun, the son and the sun. So the sun and the son, as I said, is exalted in Aries. And this is where the sun, the sun, and the son is resurrected when it passes over the equator at Easter. So this is tying into the story of Jesus being resurrected in Easter at Passover. And it's also the same story with the cycle of the sun on the ecliptic as it moves through each sign, as well as it moves through each day, starting at 6 a.m. Now, from an esoteric perspective and astro-theological perspective, in this demonstration, you'll see where Aries, as I said before, is the ram and the lamb, but it's also the sheep. Aries rules the head, the skull, and the cerebrum. Now, with Aries ruling the cerebrum, as I said in previous videos, the cerebrum has a right and a left hemisphere. But at the apex, where they connect in the center between the right and left hemisphere, is where you'll find our pineal gland. But it's also where our limbic brain is, because the pineal gland and the pituitary gland is in the limbic brain. But at that point where the right and left brain meets, there's a part called the hippocampus, and it looks like an Amon's horn. It's a ram's horn, and it's called the Amon's horn. And this horn is also showing how Aries and Mars, the ram, the lamb, the sheep, symbolically is represented in our brain. It also is Adam and atom. The correlation between Mars, Adam, man, human, and atom comes from the esoteric wisdom teachings and astro-theology. Mars is a red planet, and in astrology, Mars rules the blood, such as the cells or the DNA. Now, Adam, the proper name in the Bible, biblical name is the first man progenitor of the human race. From the Hebrew, Adam, man, literally. The one formed, it says, it's the one formed from the ground. So Adam literally means red, referenced in Wikipedia. And Adam is the first man named in the Bible, said to have come from red earth. In Hebrew, Adam means son of the red earth. In Genesis 2, chapter 2, verse 7, it says, the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So going back to that one statement, with what I just spoke about with the first house, Aries and Mars being the first entry point for the soul into reality. This is showing how life comes through the womb and is entering into the reality and taking its first breath as humankind. And Adam being the first man shows this energy, which is also that Mars energy. Now, this is also linked to the atom, because the atom is also the building block of this universe. Without atoms, the universe can't manifest in what appears to be physical. And I'm using the word appears to be physical because science is realizing that nothing is actually solid, but that's a whole nother thing. So Mars, like I said, is the impulse for life, and Adam is the man or human. Adam is the first sign of life, and this sign of life comes from an atom. The atom is interesting. It's the building block for this universe. And briefly, when the atom splits and the electron is formed, this is Eve. But we will talk about that on another video if I can manage to put that in. But Eve is represented as the electron. So the metaphysical or esoteric interpretations of Mars is shown in the Ram, Aries, Mars, right ascension, meridian. And it's also the hero's journey that's going through the ecliptic when the sun goes up on the horizon, it moves through each sign and each hour of the day. It's the hero's journey. This is what we come here to experience every day. Now, also, going back to the symbology of that ram depicted by the ram's horn, and remembering that Mars is the ram and the lamb of God, Jesus is represented as the shepherd. He's the herder of the sheep. In John chapter 1, verse 29, the next day John saw Jesus coming towards him and said, "Look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." So Jesus is often depicted as the shepherd, the herder of sheep. So that's also an astro-theological connection with the sun, the S-U-N, the S-O-N, and the sheep. Here's another diagram that also shows this. Aries rules the head. Mars is backwards for Ram, which is also right ascension meridian, but Ram or Lamb. And as you can see in the sculpture, it's showing these are ancient sculptures where it shows the ram's horn wrapped around the man's head, and it's showing that symbolically in the brain, we do have an Amon's horn in our hippocampus area that looks just like this. And this is very symbolic because these horns are where we start to form our intuition. But we'll talk about that in another video because this would make it too long. So anyway, Jesus, the Son, S-O-N, or the S-U-N, symbolically carries the lamb of Jesus. And you can see that the sheep is, or the lamb is on Jesus's shoulder, and the sun is around his head. And these pictures are ancient pictures that have been passed down. They're in churches. I mean, they're everywhere. But that's showing that not only is Jesus a shepherd, which you could take that meaning from it, But the whole meaning of the lamb with the astrology is clearly being depicted in that picture, as well as the sun, the sun and the son, being very similar energetically. And Jesus is a representation of this. The hippocampus is shaped like the ram's horn or a seahorse. The seahorse is a whole nother thing to speak of, but for now, the hippocampus, like I said, it does look like the ram's horn in the brain. Now, Mars rules the cerebrum or the neocortex of the brain, which in esoteric Christianity, it represents heaven within. And the ram's horn, as I was saying, is showing that it looks like a ram's horn, but in the Bible, in the chapter on Solomon's temple, it specifically says that Hiram Abiff, Hiram, get it? Abiff is represented as the chief architect in the building of Solomon's temple. And Solomon's temple is sun and moon, or soul of man, or son of man. And all this is talking about the inner temple, the alchemical ascension process, which is an internal psychospiritual process in the body. So Adam, which is the man, has fallen from his higher mind, the cerebrum, to live in the lower mind, which is the cerebellum, which is the lower brain. That's the animalistic, carnal part of us that is instinctive and impulsive, and it's ruled by those primary senses where we just want to act and touch and taste and feel and all of that. It's so sexual energies too. So it's showing also how, from this diagram, that Aries rules the head, the crown, and it's also heaven. And the chakras in the body, the crown chakra, starting from crown chakra all the way down to our root chakra. The internal state is our inner temple. And then Mars also rules our genitals, but this time through Scorpio. And that's also, the root chakra is our sex center. And it's also where we tend to fall into our carnal nature. So this clearly shows the fall of man through even this diagram. So in saying all of this, shadow work is instrumental, or actually it shows you a deeper side of yourself when you start to understand Mars in your chart and the aspects, the sign that it falls in, the house that it falls in, the aspects it's making to other planets, as well as looking at your first house, what the ascendant ruler is, and if there are any other planets in the first house, and so forth. So a birth chart can tell you a lot about how you think. If you have a strong Mars, then you tend to be more courageous and impulsive and willing to take risks, and more competitive. In other words, the corporate world, or the world that demands, action, will feel easy to you because your Mars will thrive in this type of environment. But Mars also on a higher level, when combined with the Scorpio energy, it's interesting how these get flipped around from higher to lower, which is exactly how we work, because the inner temple is really a cycle of energy going up and down, and through our third eye or crown chakra, back through our root chakra and up. So it's all energy circulating. But when you find the middle ground and how to balance these energies, like I've spoken about the right and left brain being more synthesized to work with our heart, then we're using this in a more functional, healthy, and divine way. But Mars in the chart, when you understand how your Mars behaves, it helps to teach you more about your inner psychology, whether or not you're more passive. You don't have a very strong Mars, say it's in Cancer, and it, doesn't have any help from other planets to make it more active. Then you tend to be more passive. It's harder for you to take risks. It's also harder for you to um, be competitive, and the world outside of you may feel a little more challenging or difficult to cope with. Of course, there are many other planets that have to come into play, but this is just a general way to explain your Mars in your chart. So this is how you can understand your Mars energy, how you work, how you think, how you feel, and I wouldn't say feel, but how you take action, because Mars doesn't stay connected to what it feels. But it can also show you what you're likely or how you're likely to behave or act in the world, how you're likely to react to the reality you're experiencing in the world. So I believe that's all I have on Mars today. Thank you for joining me. Please keep in mind that I do birth chart readings. I also do shadow work, coaching. If you're interested, my information is below. Please feel free to contact me. And also, it's important to say, please like, and if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. And all this helps my channel to grow. I appreciate you listening. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye.